Even though LEGO sets are designed to be disassembled and reassembled, it doesn't change the fact that many fans enjoy keeping their builds together, whether that be for play or for display. While some builds are practically impossible to take apart, others are entirely too delicate. Today, I'll be breaking down some of LEGO's most fragile sets. One small yet perfect example of what I'm talking about can be found in 2012's classic Vampire Castle set from the Monster Fighters line. With 949 pieces, this was the second largest set from this theme after the Haunted House set, and quickly earned itself a spot as one of LEGO's all-time greats. The towers are sturdy, the gate is stable, and the moonstones securely hook into place. Everything was clearly designed to stand up to some serious play. Well, almost everything. As you've likely noticed, this build features several spires with tall, pointy rods on top. While these do give the building an imposing impression, they aren't exactly up to code, so to speak. I have this set, and although it's one of my favorite sets of all time, these pieces are notorious for falling off super easily. If we look at the instructions, we can see the issue. Each of these tall spires is connected to the base by only a single stud. While that is enough to keep things connected, it's very prone to being bumped during play or knocked off when moving this set. Moving on, LEGO and NASA have an incredibly long and fascinating history of collaboration, which has given us several truly amazing builds. But you see, their track record isn't perfect, and there's at least one set that maybe should have stayed on the ground for another round of design revisions. Back in 2003, LEGO released the first version of the International Space Station, with this tiny but detailed 162-piece set. Although the overall look and feel of the final build is genuinely great, the actual design and stability of the set leaves something to be desired. To demonstrate, let's take a quick look through the instructions. Starting at the very beginning on step 8, we'll build the space station stand, and the main issue becomes apparent. As with the spires in the Vampire Castle, this entire build is supported by just 2 of these long rods. A few steps later, we can see that the entire build is, believe it or not, going to be supported by 2 of the weakest connections I've seen in a LEGO set. As we go further, we're supposed to just keep adding onto this delicate frame until we're done. Even if you manage to make it this far without knocking the set over, that certainly won't last, and many fans say that this is the most fragile set they own. On a positive note though, LEGO did eventually release a new version of the ISS in 2020, and this one is much larger and much more stable. In fact, this set was even sent to the real space station to be assembled in space by Japanese astronaut Satoshi Furukawa. Now, perhaps the most famous example of an overly sensitive LEGO set is WALL-E, released back in 2015. Based on the now classic Pixar film, this build was originally designed and pitched by Angus MacLane, the movie's directing animator. LEGO actually quickly agreed to this idea, believing that if anyone could bring the cute little robot to life, it was him. When this set was first released, it included a total of 677 pieces, and the final build was a faithful recreation of the on-screen version with every detail captured in glorious plastic. According to LEGO's official description at the time of release, this set took almost a decade to perfect, and that it, quote, incorporates many authentic WALL-E characteristics, including a posable neck and adjustable head. Now, with that type of marketing, this set seemed to be poised to hit the sweet spot between a great display piece and something you could actually play with. However, sadly, it seems like even a full 10 years in development wasn't quite enough, and just as customers were getting their hands on the set, many were reporting a major issue with the build. It turns out that there was a small problem with the hinges connecting the head to the torso. WALL-E's head, with those big expressive eyes, were maybe a bit too large, and the connections were a bit too loose. Several early reviews specifically called out this issue prior to LEGO's full release of this set. As it turned out, the joints holding the head, while incredibly secure, simply didn't have enough friction to hold the heavy section in place. The problem was so bad that builders were flooding forums, asking whether they'd made a mistake while building, since even the smallest bump would cause WALL-E's head to rotate backward 180 degrees and tip over. Now, LEGO fans are a clever lot, and many were quick to find solutions using spare parts they had on hand. However, LEGO wasn't going to let this problem go unanswered, and they quickly recalled any unsold WALL-E units before shipping out fixed models. But what about people who already owned the defective version? Well, anyone who had bought the original release from the LEGO website was automatically sent a small package containing a few new parts and a small instruction manual. This supplemental bag came with fewer than a dozen parts, but these were more than enough to fix the problem. How'd they do it? Well, if you just take a look at the original neck, you'll notice that the head is held up by a ratchet joint. That's a solid choice, and these pieces are great for holding things in place as long as you're only worried about motion in one direction. However, the peg on top of the ratchet joint has almost zero friction, meaning that there wasn't anything preventing the head from simply spinning around. The revised design used a ball and socket joint, which was able to provide the support, flexibility, and friction needed to keep the head in place without affecting the look of the final build. This redesign even managed to use one fewer piece, reducing the set's total count to 676 pieces. Now, sticking with space for a little bit longer, the Wall-E set reminds me of another set that was pretty fragile, the Exosuit from 2014, which was one of LEGO's earliest LEGO Ideas sets, and the company at the time was still figuring out just how far they could push fan designs. Overall, this is a fun build with a great attention to detail, but that detail comes at a price. This package comes with only 321 parts, but almost none of them are any larger than a round 2x2 brick. There's a lot of tiny pieces in this set. In fact, almost every detail of this build is small, fiddly, and only connected by one or two weak points. Regardless, it all comes together well enough to make this a fan-favorite display piece, despite it being a bit fragile. Next up, let's take a look at the skies, because Aeris's eagle and scepter from the Legends of Chima line might have faded into obscurity nowadays, but it's a classic example of what Chima did so well, combining animals and vehicles into something we haven't seen much of before or since. The legs might be a little wonky looking, but it's the wings that have earned this set a spot in today's video. As a vehicle representing the eagle tribe, this jet couldn't just have regular wings, it needed feathers, and that's exactly where the issue comes up. You see, beginning on page 61, you'll start building the wings, and each of these will need 4 of these plates with a vertical bar. A few pages later, you find yourself attaching an equal number of these robot arms before slotting the feathers into place. Now, the connection between the robot arms and the feathers is solid, that's not the issue. The issue is that the robot arms have a bad habit of popping off the bars they're attached to with even the slightest bump. Since these feathers were quite long, they were easily knocked during play, and any downward force on them would dislodge the arm bar connection. Another fragile ship, the super secret police dropship, was released as part of the LEGO Movie sets back in 2014, and while it's hardly the most impressive set from that line, it's a unique build with 854 parts and some pretty cool minifigures. At first glance, it seems like a solid build, thanks to the ship's large, blocky body and massive cockpit element. While the majority of the build is as solid as it looks, thanks to some great Technic parts usage when constructing the frame, the issues that some builders have complained about come from the ship's many small external decorations and accents, which, according to some reports, tend to pop off quite easily while playing. Moving from the sky to the sea, Metalbeard's Sea Cow was released as part of the same wave as the dropship, but with more than 3 times the pieces at 2,741 bricks. This build is simply gorgeous, and the level of detail inside and out is amazing. Unfortunately, as with the Exosuit, this level of detail comes at the price of stability, and certain parts of this ship are known to be more fragile than they should be. Now, it's important to point out that most of the LEGO Movie sets are designed to be played with first and foremost. However, the Sea Cow is very much a display piece above all else. In fact, this might be the most fragile and delicate ship that LEGO's ever put out, at least at this scale, and that has caused some LEGO fans some unnecessary struggle and hassle. Several pieces can be easily broken off and lost, especially when removing parts to access the ship's interior. Despite the fragility of this set, the ship just looks so cool. It really is a perfect display piece, and even the building process has been universally praised, which has earned this build a stellar reputation, as long as you're not too rough with it. The fact is that despite this set being a bit fragile, most LEGO fans look past this, and this has even had the added effect of increasing this set's resale value, which currently sits around $400 even for a used copy. Returning from our sea voyage, let's take a look at this set, the original version of the ATTE. This build was introduced in 2003 and hasn't really aged very well when compared to newer versions. While the visual design has certainly improved over the last 20 plus years, it's the stability that I'm more interested in here, or should I say the lack thereof. Apparently, this early model had some serious design flaws that prevented it from being a truly classic set. The biggest issue here is the legs. This set had a bad habit of breaking down if even the slightest pressure was applied to the top, thanks to how the legs connect to the larger frame. Looking at the instructions for this set, you can see that each of the legs has 2 Technic rods at the top that simply slide into the main frame, While this is fine on its own, the extremely wide angle of the walker's stance means that these legs are very prone to dislocation. However, it's not just ships that are known for their fragility, and even some larger buildings have a bit of a bad rap regarding stability. As a prime example, 2007's Ferris wheel was one of LEGO's earliest attempts at a functioning carnival ride, and was, for the most part, a successful effort. With just over 1,000 pieces and standing nearly 23 inches tall or 60 centimeters, this build certainly pops. Maybe a little bit too much though. It seems that LEGO is far more interested in functionality than durability, and many builders have reported that the Ferris wheel's arms pop off rather easily if you try to move them manually. Additionally, the passenger cars have a tendency to slide down the Technic rods over time. However, the most fragile building out there might just be the Upside Down from Stranger Things. While most people report that the build is surprisingly stable once it's completed, getting to that point can be more than a little tricky. As you wrap up the build, you'll need to attach the two major sections of this building. The process is pretty complicated and requires a steady hand. You'll be required to build the two support trees, however this is the easy part, and what comes next has led to more than a few dropped and shattered sets. This is no easy task, even for the most experienced builders, and you'll almost certainly want a second set of hands to help you out. Once it's all put together though, the end result is quite stable, but it's a bit of a hassle to get to that point. If you can think of any other fragile LEGO sets, let me know in the comments. Click on this video to discover 17 hidden secrets in new LEGO sets, and be sure to subscribe to my channel SpitBrix for more LEGO videos.